Loco. We are interrupting your programming for breaking news just into our newsroom. There is an active shelter in place in the city of Freeport. Officials there say there was a chemical leak at the Olin unit in Plant B. That's according to the Brazoria Community Awareness and Emergency Response Line, also known as the CARE line.
And the shelter in place also includes the cities of Clute and Lake Jackson. And at this time, no other communities need to shelter in place.
Okay, as that shelter in place remains in effect, we just got an update just seconds ago at 9:46. The update from Olin, the leak has been stopped. At this time, no other communities need to shelter in place. The safety of our employees, the community, and our environment is always our top priority, but the leak has stopped. That's great news.
That is very good
really
news.
good news.
According to the city of Freeport Emergency Management, there is currently an active chlorine gas release at Olin unit located in Plant B. On-site emergency response teams are actively engaged, they tell us, and employees are following all safety protocols as the situation is addressed. Again, the leak has stopped, though. The city of Freeport closely monitoring the incident and providing assistance as needed to ensure public safety. At this time, there is no immediate threat to surrounding communities, but we will provide updates if conditions change. We do appreciate your cooperation and encourage residents to avoid the area until further notice. Please stay tuned to official city channels for the latest information. That's what they're telling us into our newsroom.
All right. Okay. So something that has been a concern for the past couple of weeks is the high winds that we've been having in this heat. Kim Castro, can you tell us what the winds are doing in this area?
Yeah, luckily right now the winds are sustained out of the south 5 to 10 miles an hour. So we're really keeping a close eye on the air quality across Houston area. It's in the moderate range, and I just checked the gauge for Freeport, specifically for the Freeport and Lake Jackson area. It's still reading in the moderate, so please continue to take those precautions. Like Steph was mentioning, turning off the AC, even though temperatures are warm. You do not want to be filtering that air into your home. Right now, current conditions in Freeport, 82 degrees with the humidity. It feels like 87. This is happening in the morning, so we're not seeing the peak heating of the day just yet. The breeze, as I mentioned, out of the south-southeast right now at exactly 8 miles an hour. Across the area, wind speeds have been fairly light this morning, a big change from yesterday, which is a good thing. It is straight up out of the south, so areas that would be impacted would be moving from Freeport towards Lake Jackson and eventually towards Pearland. Wind gusts for this afternoon are going to start to pick up the pace just a little bit, 15 to 20 miles an hour, but you'll notice through this evening, wind is still out of the south. So again, impact zones would be due north, kind of working their way up 288, etc. For the evening into tomorrow, wind's going to shift out of the north, and that's when we're going to start to get that drying breeze and some relief from the heat. But for now, temperatures are going to be a big concern. I'm going to fast forward and show you what our temperature outlook is for today. So actual air temperatures are going to push into the upper 90s this afternoon. So hopefully this situation can be contained before we start seeing air temperature that's at 90 by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It actually feels like 99 when you factor in the humidity. That's your heat index. By the time we get to 3 o'clock, that's when the heat index peaks. It'll be feeling like 103 degrees. So again, really important today to have containment on that so that we can resume our normal safety procedures, which would be to have working AC units. But for now, guys, we're monitoring the situation here closely. I'm glad to know the leak has been contained, but just keeping those precautions for the time being because we don't know the extent of the leak and what impacts are being felt in that area.
And even with the 10-mile-per-hour wind that you were saying in that area, even though the leak has stopped, there could still be toxins and chemicals in the air
that are lingering.
Yes, lingering effects
Something to
there.
watch out for sure.
Shelter in place still there.
And obviously, people in that that part of the area, they're not unfamiliar with these types of things, and so hopefully they all know what to do when you shelter in place.
Yeah, so they usually don't bat an eye when we talk about shelter in place because they're so accustomed to this. But we were just talking about this before we went on air. People do tend to panic when we say shelter in place because what that also means, it's included, you have to shut your air conditioning off in your car and in your home, shut all the doors and windows, put the towels, block the underneath of the door, and that can make things heat up very quickly, but that is part of a shelter in place.
And with as hot as it's been, it's a good reminder to let them know that's what they need to do when they shelter in place.
Okay, we've got one of our investigative reporters, Jeremy Rogowski, joining us with some new information that he's gathered.
what we always do in situations like this, guys, is also look at the past, right? Look at the history of chemical plants. Do they have any environmental violations? Do they have any occupational and safety workplace violations? Initially, what we found was there was a leak back in February of 2023. It was also a chlorine leak. That was really a non-event that was put out and contained very quickly, just like this morning's. But it's important for context and perspective to always look at the history of compliance with environmental regulations, with workplace safety regulations, so that's something that we're going to continue to do. But again, this whole event seems to have taken course just about totality about 45 minutes. Coming into Brazosport emergency management officials about 9:01, an active chlorine gas release at the Olin plant. Olin, by the way, quick research shows, is a vinyl processing plant that merged with Dow Chemical about 10 years ago. So that's why it's called the Dow Olin plant, O-L-I-N. And so, according to the timeline from Brazosport officials, came in at 9:01. Again, you guys have been mentioning the shelter in place for the cities of Clute and Lake Jackson, 9:46. Again, that leak was stopped, contained, but the shelter in place still active for those two communities.
Yeah, and Olin Corporation, according to what we see here, they manufacture ammunition, chlorine, and sodium hydroxide.
Now, Jeremy, do we know in that 45 minutes they were able to contain it, if that's considered a quick response based off of what we've covered before?
Well, chlorine is highly volatile. I mean, if chlorine ignites, you have a major problem, right? Whether that be in a tanker, we don't know exactly what type of equipment we're talking about here, what type of, where was it stored, was it under pressure, that sort of thing, all questions that we'll be digging into. But generally speaking, chlorine is not a substance that you mess around with. It's highly volatile, highly combustible, flammable, and coast to coast around the country when there's a chlorine leak that goes, you could have some serious repercussions. So fortunately, that was stopped.
And let's hope the winds helped.
Yeah, for sure.
That's something we'll find
10
out.
miles
Jeremy,
an hour
thank you.
less. Okay.
We're going to move on to Brazosport's ISD statement coming in. Due to the care sirens from a local industrial plant being activated, all of our campuses have gone into a shelter in place. Doors will remain shut and will not be releasing students until the all clear is given by local authorities. We will provide updates as soon as we receive additional information. Now, FEMA says to stay inside and minimize airflow by turning off air conditioners and fans, going into an interior room without windows. Actually, Steph talked about this a little bit. Will make it easier to seal the room. Use duct tape or towels to seal around the windows and doors. Steph touched base on this earlier, actually.
Yes, because people are really in need of air conditioning this morning, all throughout the day. Cheetah was telling us on KHOU 11 Morning News that today is expected to be the hottest day of the week. So that is very serious when we're telling big communities of people to shut their air conditioning off. And even though the leak has been contained, there still could be dangerous chemicals hanging in the air. As Kim Castro was telling us, it's not very windy, so that attributes to the hang time in those communities. They want people to stay as safe as possible, and especially people with breathing disorders, things like that. They can be highly sensitive to toxins like this, like chlorine.
All right,
Good information, good reminder there, Steph.
And if you're just tuning in, we're breaking in because there was a chlorine release at Olin's Plant B, so a shelter in place was in effect for Clute and Lake Jackson. As far as we know, it is still in effect, and we will go off the air now, but we will continue online on KHOU 11 Plus, giving you the very latest on this chemical leak that has now stopped in that area of Freeport.
Okay. Thank you for joining us on KHOU 11 Plus. I'm Stephanie Simmons here with Ron Trevino and Ugochi Loca. We are here and we are joining you to talk about some breaking news that just came into our newsroom within the last hour. We're talking about a chlorine leak. It's since been contained, but in the city of Freeport, they still have an active shelter in place.
And
Yeah.
Clute and Lake Jackson. Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
And we're hearing residents in the Clute and Lake Jackson areas reported hearing industrial sirens as a leak was going on at the time. So residents, of course, wondering what all the commotion was, and now they know this is the case. Now that chemical leak, of course, contained, which is good news.
Yeah, and
Yes.
of course we're trying to gather as much information as we can for you right now. Our assignments desk is making all sorts of calls with law enforcement and emergency responders in that area of Freeport, as well as the plant, to get the very latest. And they, of course, are issuing statements every few minutes about what is going on. The latest one was that the leak was stopped, which is great.
Yeah.
Public safety is the first and the most top priority when we're dealing with a situation like this. Just a few minutes ago when we were on the air, our investigative reporter Jeremy Rogowski was very quick to look into the past of this plant and found that there were infractions before. So back in 2023, there was an issue. So be interested to get more information as we continue to investigate and gather if there were any sort of injuries involved there and what had happened. When you hear about a highly toxic chemical like this, highly flammable, it's very concerning whether the leak is stopped or not.
Yeah, and the good news is we haven't heard of any injuries. Let's hope it stays that way.
Yeah, I know that they're monitoring right now Memorial Hermann Lifeline being dispatched to the area for a chlorine exposure. No information, as you mentioned, on injuries. Hopefully that stays that way, but that is something they're looking at as well.
Yeah, you have to take every precaution in something like this, because seconds count when you're talking about life-saving procedures that may or may not have had to happen this morning.
And we're talking about a leak, to be specific. This is further south and west of what we refer to as Refinery Row here in the Houston area off of 225, where we've had explosions and things like that, big plumes of chemicals in the air. That is not the case right now, but regardless of if there was an explosion or a fire or just a leak, there can be massive toxins and chemicals in the air that hang around for some time. Now, a lot of times plants have their own air quality monitoring systems and team on site to let the public know and work with officials as to when they can lift that shelter in place.
And here's the latest pic that we have from the plant out there. Of course, we have crews on their way out there. We don't know if they've arrived or not. And of course, we have to worry about their safety. They can only get so close to this facility, even though this leak has stopped.
Yeah, if you look at the picture on your screen here, you see it's a very active scene. Obviously, crews there, even after the fact that the leak has been contained, trying to make sure everything is in place and still isn't all clear. So, of course, the school's standing by, right, making sure it's okay for kids to be released and move around. And they're just waiting to make sure that everything is running smoothly. And they want to be for sure, because this is very dangerous.
Yes, we're going to send it back over to meteorologist Kim Castro. Kim, for folks just joining us, can you explain what winds are like in the area right now?
Yeah, so winds are pretty light, 5 to 10 miles an hour. They are out of the Gulf, which is a fresh breeze. However, because they're out of the Gulf, that means they are moving north. And so the communities directly north of Freeport, so Lake Jackson working up 288, would have a concern about some of those chemicals potentially becoming airborne and being transported into the area. Now, you mentioned because of the shelter in place, the mandate is to turn off the air conditioning so that those particulates don't float around in your home. For this morning, it's hot, but it's not as bad as it's going to get this afternoon. So if we can get this under control this morning, that is the best case scenario. Even still, though, this is the heat index already. So this is our neighborhood weather network. These are actual gauges in people's homes. So the most accurate reading we can get, Freeport on Dixie Drive. Right now, the feeling is 90 degrees. So that's when you factor in the actual air temperature to the humidity. It gets even hotter, though, the further north that you go. So Lake Jackson right now, 103 Winding Way already feels like 97 degrees. Papaya Street feels like 90. Rosewood Street in the same Lake Jackson area feels like 93, and Lily Street feels like 92. So it's certainly already a hot day. But as far as wind and wind gust, it's not as bad as it was yesterday. Those gusts were howling yesterday at 25 to even 30 miles an hour. Right now, gusts are at 15, so it's not too bad. And they'll remain at around 15, maybe get up to 20 miles an hour throughout the remainder of the afternoon and evening. Again, I think this is going to be contained here within the next few hours, which is a good thing, because look at what happens to our temperature and feels like trend over the next few hours. We're going to heat up really fast. So 90 is going to be the actual air temperature temperature at 1 o'clock in the afternoon with the humidity, it's going to feel like 99. During peak heating of the day, the feels like value gets up to 103 degrees. Actual air temperatures are going to soar today into the upper 90s. This is the hottest day we have of the 7-day forecast, so we do not want to be without AC for a prolonged stretch. This evening, better news comes. We actually have a front that's going to roll through the area. That's going to shift the wind out of the north now, and it is going to start to drop temperatures and humidity, but that's going to be later on tonight. Right now, keeping a really close eye on air quality. Across Southeast Texas, we're in the moderate range, which is very typical for the type of setup right now. We have high pressure overhead, and that's what tends to happen. We don't have the best air quality, but it's not the worst. And I am keeping a really close eye on the air quality gauge in Freeport, and it is still clocking in the mid 60s, which puts it at a moderate range there as well. Again, it doesn't pick up on those fine particles that we're currently tracking, so the situation might be much different than what the gauges are now showing, which is why the shelter in place is in effect and why we gotta monitor the situation there closely. Right now in Freeport, 82 for the actual air temperature with the dew points in the low 70s. It feels overall like you're in the upper 80s. Some neighborhoods though are going to feel a little bit hotter than that. It just depends what kind of vegetation you have nearby. If you're surrounded by a good grassy area, then it's a safe bet that you feel like you're in the upper 80s. However, if your home is surrounded by a lot of concrete, a lot of buildings, then you are going to feel a little bit hotter than that. It's just a matter of where you live. Regardless, hydration is going to be something that you want to take into account early on in the day, and especially as we go into the afternoon. And again, guys, hopefully this gets resolved quickly so that we can restore AC advantages and cool off that way.
All right, thank you so much, Kim Castro, monitoring the winds out there. Very important to take into mind in light of what happened this morning. So if you're just tuning in, let's give you a timeline of what happened. At 9:01, we got the report from Olin Plant B saying that there had been an active chlorine gas release. Then at 9:30, officials there issued a shelter in place for the cities of Clute and Lake Jackson. Then at 9:46, some great news from Olin. In response to the chlorine release in Olin's Plant B, a shelter in place still in effect, but the leak had been stopped at 9:46. So as far as we know, though, the shelter in place remains for Clute and Lake Jackson.
Thanks, Ron. Now, this is an emergency notification from the Brazosport College. All employees are instructed to shelter in place immediately due to a nearby chlorine leak, which again, we reported that leak has been contained by local authorities. Please take the following actions to remain indoors and close all doors and windows, shut off any ventilation systems, including air conditioning or heating, and stay away from exterior doors and windows. Do not attempt to leave campus until further notice. Now, you know, Steph, you talked about this earlier, and then we've got a report from Lake Jackson Police also echoing that same message. They are advising people to stay inside and also turn off the AC units that you have there, remain indoors. They also mention how this is a level 3 chlorine active release there. Of course, it's been contained, but they mention that means that the gas went outside, if you will, of the facility. So something else we'll be looking into.
Yes, absolutely. And just to give this perspective, we were just talking this morning and last night about Heights High School having to be released early because their HVAC system was having problems. They've since been sent back to school, but an entire high school being released because we're talking about no air conditioning when it's this hot. It's even hotter today, and a shelter in place includes shutting off the AC. So it's going to be very uncomfortable for folks who are in the area of these shelter in places. But I'm telling you what, folks, being uncomfortable for just a couple of hours, hopefully it only lasts, or maybe less than that, is safer than being outside and breathing in any chemicals that may be still in the air.
Yeah, and if you're looking for some good news right now, at least this happened in the morning where the temperatures are in the 80s, probably 82 degrees right now, and not in the 90s in the heat of the day.
Yes, we do have shelter-in-place info, as we were just talking about. Turn off your air conditioning, minimize airflow, and seal off the doors and windows. That includes rolling up towels. You can put that underneath your doors or around any windows to seal off any areas that may be leaking. And that's the best thing to do at this point. But again, it can be very uncomfortable to shut off that air conditioning. And Ugochi, even though this is far away from 225, we've dealt with chemical leaks before. You've covered this before. Every reporter and anchor in our newsroom has covered this. So sometimes we're dealing with chemicals that are so dangerous and so harmful, they ask the reporters to step away from the immediate area.
That's
because
right.
it's harmful for you to be breathing in. And sometimes our reporters and personnel have had to wear masks
That's
to
right.
go out and report on these situations. We don't know if that's the case right now,
Of course.
but this is a serious chemical.
Yeah, speaking of reporters, we do have Jason Miles, who's on the way there, as well as Troy Kless. He's headed to Lake Jackson. Jason is headed to the plant, so we have two of our reporters headed there now to get more information from the scene, hopefully to talk to officials, to talk to residents in the area to see how they're coping with all of this. Can you imagine no AC? I know Ron mentioned it's in the 80s right now, but it's still hot.
Yes,
you know,
it's
how they're keeping
very
cool.
hot out there. And of course, you know, we want you to know that to keep it right here, because we are doing our best to get the most up-to-date information for you. We're placing calls to all agencies out there and trying to get the very latest on what's going on. But the latest from the company at 9:46 is that this chlorine leak has stopped. So that is fabulous news. But now we need more information. Was anybody hurt? We don't know. And how soon will the shelter-in-place be lifted so people can go about their daily lives?
Yeah.
Yes, and we're talking about the chemical chlorine and the exposure to that. So we want to let folks know we are efforting some phone calls with medical professionals as well as local officials to talk more with us about what can happen when someone may be exposed to that kind of a chemical.
And the good news again, we haven't heard of any injuries, and let's hope
Yes,
it
hopefully
stays that.
not.
Let's hope it stays that
Hopefully
way right
not.
now. Here's another map of the area. We're talking about the Freeport area, and again, this chemical leak, this chlorine leak, was recorded just after 9 o'clock this morning. So it was stopped at 9:46, or that's when we got the report of it stopping at 9:46. Could have been maybe 45 minutes of this chemical leak happening.
Yeah.
So
And we don't know what caused the leak. We're
Right, we're still working to find
figure
out.
that out. But when you're dealing with chemical plants in general, and we know we have a lot of them around Houston, it's a major employer here in town, all over the city. They do have their own professional teams on site to deal with these sort of situations. They have safety crews in place, protocol in place, then they call outside sources. And that includes a lot of places having their own air quality control teams
Yeah.
to help monitor the situation and make sure they work with other city officials to all come to an agreement on when it's safe to lift that shelter in place.
Yeah, so people are just really standing by to
Yes.
see when is a good time to go back out, when it's cleared. And hopefully they get the all clear soon, because it is very hot right now. So that's a big concern, I would imagine, for those who don't have AC, who are in that area right now.
all right, we got some CDC information about chlorine release, and the effects depend on how the person was exposed, how much they were exposed to, and how long they were exposed for. When chlorine touches gas and moist tissues, it creates an acid that can hurt these tissues. If high amounts are breathed in, breathing problems may show up right away. Symptoms of exposure to higher levels of chlorine include the following: blurred vision or eye tearing, burning feeling in the nose, throat, lungs, and the eyes, coughing and or coughing up white to pink colored fluid, chest tightness, breathing problems, shortness of breath, or rapid and shallow breathing. Respiratory failure could happen too.
A lot of possible effects there, oh my goodness.
Yeah, a major irritant for sure.
Not to be trifled with at all, which is why we have the shelter in place.
Of course. Well, we are just trying to wait here for more word from officials to see how this what caused this leak. Again, it stopped at around 9:46. So based on some of the others we've covered in this area, this was relatively quick to
Yeah.
stop the leak, but that doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet. So a shelter in place issued for Freeport, Clute, and Lake Jackson areas. That includes your homes. You need to shut off your air conditioning. You need to close up all windows, shut the doors, and use towels, anything you can to close off any areas that may be leaking, any, just cracks, nooks, crannies,
Yeah.
things like that. You need to cover everything right now.
Yeah, and if you want to hear it from the Lake Jackson Police Department themselves, they posted on Facebook, it's been advised of an active level 3 chlorine release from Dow Chemical. They call it Dow Chemical. We call it the Olin plant now. Level 3 meaning the gas is outside of the confines of the facility. It's advised to remain indoors with doors and windows closed and air conditioners off. Okay, now since then we have learned that the leak has been contained, but this shelter in place remains in effect.
Yeah. And some other symptoms they mentioned, right? If you're exposed to this, potentially a frostbite if exposed to liquid chlorine, nausea and or vomiting, skin pain, redness, or blisters. And if low amounts are breathed in, symptoms may show up later, which is very scary and alarming there. Now, if chlorine is in the air, people can be exposed through skin or eye contact or breathing in the chlorine gas. And if chlorine is in water, people can be exposed by touching or drinking water that contains chlorine because chlorine gas is heavier than air and will also sink to lower areas and increase the risk of exposure there. So very, very concerning what could possibly happen if they're exposed too long.
Yeah, I would think about when you go swimming in a swimming pool, we've got chlorine in there, but that's a safe level of chlorine. But even if you open your eyes underwater, that can be concerning, that can irritate you, and that's a safe level of chlorine.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with an unknown amount, and a lot of these plants, they deal with more than one, several kinds of chemicals, but as of right now, the only chemical we're being told that has leaked is the chlorine.
Yeah, but as you can see from the list of symptoms out there, it can get you very ill, or it can cause death. So it's something you have to take very seriously, especially the people in Clute and Lake Jackson right now that are under this shelter in place.
I'd be interested to find out later when they called it a level 3 chlorine leak, and in the sense of it being outside the facility, just how they were able to determine that and the cause itself, just the different levels and how it's attached to the severity of the situation. So curious to know in terms of the part of the investigation, how they could break that down and explain just the different levels and the seriousness of it and how people should be aware of that as well too.
Yeah, and this just happened around just after 9 o'clock this morning. And you think about this is a Tuesday, a typical Tuesday, 10:19 right now. And even though the leak has stopped, people are going about their day. They're at work, they're at school, and this is affecting all buildings and homes in those areas.
This is the statement that we got from Brazosport ISD. Due to the care sirens from a local industrial plant being activated, all of our campuses have gone into a shelter in place. Doors will remain shut, and we will not be releasing students until the all clear has been given by local authorities, and we have not heard of an all clear. We will provide updates as soon as we receive additional information. So that's coming from the ISD.
Yeah. So of course, parents being informed as this information's coming in and really just trying to figure out when things will be all clear and things will be running smoothly. But I find it interesting that even though the leak has been contained, the shelter in place is still active because they want to be absolutely sure that everything is safe.
Yeah,
They're
given how
testing the
dangerous
air
chlorine can
quality.
be.
That's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But as Kim Castro was telling us, it's not super windy in the air, and thank goodness we're not dealing with an explosion on a windy day, leak, but still serious. But we've had other issues in the past where those chemicals just travel for miles. So hopefully we will not get word that anything like that is happening. Just these immediate areas of Freeport, Clute, and Lake Jackson, but they're highly populated areas.
Yeah, and this is the Olin plant that's in the Freeport area. Olin Corporation is an American manufacturer of ammunition, chlorine, and sodium hydroxide, according to what we find on their website.
And another shelter in place from this is an emergency notification from Brazoport's College. They also really getting the word out that all employees have been instructed to shelter in place there to immediately due to that nearby chlorine leak, again, that's been contained at this hour, reported by local authorities. They are telling people to take the following actions. Even now, even though the leak has been contained, that shelter in place, as long as it's in effect right now, they want folks to remain indoors and close all doors and windows. Reminder again to shut off any ventilation systems, including air conditioning or heating, which we know with AC right now, it being that hot, they definitely want to stress that and remind folks that is, yes, what you should do in a shelter in place, and stay away from those exterior doors and windows. Do not attempt to leave campus until further notice. So basically, stay put, stay in place, don't go outside.
And as we've been telling you, we do have 2 crews heading to that area. Our Jason Miles is heading to the plant, and Troy Kless is heading to Lake Jackson to check out the situation. We don't know at this point, as we mentioned earlier, sometimes when we're dealing with leaks and chemical explosions, anything with chemicals, and we certainly have our fair share of chemical plants around the Houston area. It's a major employer here in our city and across the area. We don't know if it's safe for our reporters or our crews to get anywhere close to that.
Here's a live look from the Texas Medical Center, Herman Memorial, the pad there for the chopper. We don't know if the chopper's arriving with anybody from the Olin plant in Freeport, but we're monitoring the situation there in the Texas Medical Center. Of course, we're hoping that nobody has been hurt, but of course everybody's taking every precaution with this release of chlorine that happened this morning at the Olin plant there in Freeport.
And as we were mentioning earlier, we were looking up information for folks because the immediate panic would be, what if I inhaled this? What kind of irritants? What can happen? So on the surface level, the CDC was mentioning eye irritants. Your skin can itch. If it gets a little more serious, you can cough up some liquid white to pink-like liquid. We hope it doesn't get to that situation. We hope no one's having any issues, but that's why this shelter in place is important. Essentially, you need to shut off the air conditioning, close your doors and windows, because they don't want you to bring any of the outside air inside your home or inside anywhere where you work or any schools.
Yeah, that's what it can do to you right there. So they're advising you to turn off the AC, minimize the airflow, seal off doors and windows if you can.
Can we take that Memorial Herman life flight pad shot again? I'm wondering if we can show that. Just wanted to emphasize, yeah, they were essentially dispatched to the area for possible chlorine exposure. So they were there ready, and we're waiting to see. We understand they'll be dispatched back to this pad in about 10 minutes. So we are waiting to see if anyone was hurt, if anyone has been affected by that. But I think it was great they were out there as just to be ready, essentially, if anyone needed help too.
We're dealing with a chemical that does have a strong odor, so people go out and they'll definitely be able to smell something, but it's colorless. But it's very harmful, and a lot of these plants, they deal with adhesive, acrylics, different plastic, different very highly toxic chemicals. So we want to get public safety out there and push what we know to make sure everyone's safe first and foremost. But the secondary aspect of a situation like this is the environmental impact. And so we're waiting on a couple of experts, and hopefully we can get a hold of people to speak to that aspect of this. If there's a chemical like chlorine in the air, what that can do.
Yeah. And officials are saying if you believe you've been exposed, what to do, and that is get inside right away, take off all your clothes, jewelry, wash your skin and hair with soap. So again, that is something you could do immediately if you feel like you've been exposed or been put in a situation where you might be at harm because of that exposure.
So this all happened at the Olin plant in Freeport this morning around 9 o'clock. The leak was contained at 9:46, so that's when we got word of that. Here's a little bit more about Olin. Apparently they got, according to their website, more than 25 locations in North America. #1 producer of bleach and hydrochloric acid in North America. Most diversified chlorine envelope of any North America producer. They also produce small caliber ammunition. They have 6,400 employees in North America. and they're the #1 producer of epoxy resin. So
big company.
they do produce a lot of chemicals.
Highly
right.
potent substances, highly potent chemicals. But as I touched on earlier, these kinds of plants, the employees who work there, they're well versed, well trained in activating these response plans when there is an explosion, which is not the case right now. It is just a leak. The leak has since been contained. But in most cases, they know when to call for evacuations, when to call 911, when to issue a shelter in place. And they work with city officials on this as well.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned earlier that it's not the folks who live down there's first rodeo when it comes to all of this. We are hoping to hear from our reporters who get on the scene here soon to speak to residents, see how they're doing, their reaction to yet another, if you will, leak, and how they're really holding up in the shelter in place because they don't have AC. They have to stay inside. It's not recommended to go outside to get air. So just wondering how they're coping with all of this. So that'll be the next thing we follow up on, hopefully on the scene.
And we're keeping tabs of all of this. Our assignments desk and our reporters out in the field are trying to get the very latest information. Excuse me, the very latest information. So in order to keep us all safe, we're still in a shelter in place in Clute and Lake Jackson.
All right, let's go back to meteorologist Kim Castro. It is 10:27. Kim, this happened just after 9 o'clock this morning. Again, the leak is contained, it's sealed off, but the shelter in place is still in effect. What can you say as far as winds in the area and what that does to you when chemicals are possibly still in the air?
Yeah, that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Wind is traveling out of the south at 5 to 10 miles an hour. And Steph, you made the point that chlorine is a really strong gas. It has a pungent smell, and that's true. You might have smelled it right away and maybe you don't smell it anymore. Do not take that as your sign that everything is okay. Our bodies get accustomed to smells and gas smells really fast. So it may still be lingering despite the breeze. Remember, it's not a very strong breeze right now. It is sustained at just 5 to 10 miles an hour. So until that shelter in place order has been lifted, you are still advised to stay put, to continue to have that AC shut off, and just try to create a contained space for you that is free from outside influences. Gusts right now are pretty tame compared to yesterday. They're just at about 15 miles an hour along the coastline. So this does mean that the wind pushes straight up from south to north. So with this leak originating in the Freeport area, traveling up 288 is going to be a concern, which is why Clute is under that shelter in place order. But I want to get you down to the street level so you could point out your particular neighborhood and whether or not you would be in the path of this leak as the wind blows from south to north. So if you live in North Gulf Boulevard on Skinner Street, on Spring Branch Road, up 288, North Avenue, Warbanet, Chlorine Road, ironically, Calcium Road, Crescent Heights Street, Cemetery Avenue, all of these areas are right in that path of that south breeze. Current air quality, don't take this as your all clear sign. This is just a very large sample of air in southeast Texas, so it wouldn't pick up on something very localized like a gas leak in Freeport. So for that, we really have to rely on officials that are sampling that air at the surface. Dixie Drive right now feels like 90 degrees, guys. So yeah, the quicker we can get this contained, the better we're heating up.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Kim Castro. Let's go to a live shot from the Texas Medical Center. A Life Flight chopper has just landed there at the pad above Memorial Hermann Hospital. We don't know if it's carrying anybody who is injured. It was sent out there as precaution. We're, of course, monitoring the situation, but this Life Flight chopper has just returned from the Olin plant in Freeport. So,
standing by to see if a patient's in
yes,
there or not.
we've got reporters there, and of course at the plant too, as we try to find out what's happened here in this chlorine leak. Very deadly in certain amounts, obviously, and we hope that no one has been hurt. But the shelter in place continues for Clute and Lake Jackson.
It is 10:30 right now, and joining us on the phone is Dr. Johnny, who's a pulmonologist at UT Health. Dr. Johnny, thank you for being with us. We were talking a little bit earlier about the effects that a chemical like chlorine can have if someone breathes it in, if it's hanging in the air. Can you speak to how that can irritate someone?
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me. So chlorine is an oxidative agent. So it reacts with the antioxidants, the good molecules in the lung epithelium, the lining of the lung, and it creates a severe inflammation. Now, clearly that is also related to the exposure in terms of how long you have had the exposure and how close you were to the leak, how much concentration of chlorine gas you had inhaled. It can lead to severe lung inflammation leading to respiratory failure, respiratory distress. Some patients may have decrease in their lung function that is measured over time. But again, it all depends on the level of exposure and the concentration of the gas.
Doctor, can you tell us, have you ever yourself treated anybody who's been exposed to chlorine?
We have treated patients that have come to us after their acute exposure, and they have had issues with like chronic cough or difficulty breathing. And then we have also had them gotten their lung function test a year later, and they have shown decrease in their lung function. Not everyone, but a few of the patients who have had extreme exposures with very close encounter with the chlorine gas have shown decrease in their lung function.
Dr. Johnny, if someone feels like they have been exposed to it, is there anything they can do in that moment to minimize exposures, to prevent some of the effects you just talked about?
I think a couple of things that are easy to do is trying to wear a mask or a cloth around your nose and face so that you are at least not inhaling a larger concentration of chlorine, moving away from the exposure. And if you do have symptoms, especially with difficulty breathing or wheezing, you should consider going to ER. There are medications that can help with reversing those effects pretty quickly.
So just to be clear, breathing hard would be like a first initial symptom to know that you could be in some trouble.
Yeah, or you can have incessant coughing as another symptom.
Okay.
Dr. Johnny, we know that people with respiratory issues that are pre-existing are probably most at risk when they're dealing with something where there's chemicals to inhale. If we're talking about a healthy individual, when is it concerning as far as the length of time that they've been exposed to something? Because we know the most at-risk people, it would be much shorter, but when should a healthy individual be concerned if they've been outside for 10, 15 minutes? What's that length of time in your mind?
I think a lot of it depends on how close they are to the source and how good their lung function is. Because if they are smokers, if they have been using marijuana, or if they have been having, vaping, then their lungs are at a higher risk of developing worsening inflammation because they already have pre-existing exposure to other substances. So I think that also depends on that individual. We do not have a specific concentration, but we know that at concentrations greater than 50.
Okay, I think we lost Dr. Johnny. Can you hear us at all, Doctor?
All right.
Yeah, we'll try
He
to
gave
get
us
back to him.
great vital information.
Great information, yes.
Dr. Pushan Johnny, a pulmonologist with UT Health, was joining us on the phone. We'll try to get back to him as he tries to give us more information on just how bad chlorine can be to the human body.
Yeah, and a couple of points that he mentioned during that interview with him is severe lung inflammation could be an effect depending on how exposed you are to that chlorine. And he even mentioned that over time, depending on how exposed you were, it could cause lung failure. That was alarming to hear. Dr. Johnny joins us back now. Dr. Johnny, thank you for coming on back on the air with us. If you could tell us a little bit about, in reference to, the shelter in place, how serious people should take it, essentially, when it comes to preventing further exposure, so they're in the all clear, essentially.
I think that's the main thing, is to stay away or kind of move as far away as possible from the source of exposure. Having a mask or having a cloth around your nasal and oral areas would help prevent excessive exposures, because some of it would be getting exposed by the cloth or the mask. But I think moving away is the best thing that you can do until that exposure level can decrease. And the most important thing is if you do develop symptoms, do not wait. Go to a nearest ER so that they can treat you accordingly. Most of the patients will feel better with breathing treatments, with inhalers, etc., and may not need like long-term problems. We may not need any follow-up in most patients.
Okay, doctor, we got word at 9:46 that the leak had been stopped, so it's almost been an hour, and the shelter in place remains in effect in Clute and Lake Jackson. Does that disturb you, or do you have anything to add to that?
I would not know because I don't know the extent of the leak, etc. I would not be able to comment on, how far that shelter is or how far or what the exposure level is to the individual patients. One thing I would definitely say is that if you have pre-existing asthma, if you have pre-existing COPD, you need to check with your doctor if you have any worsening symptoms. Don't wait too long.
How would Dr. Johnny, how would a patient be treated if they're exposed severely to a chlorine leak of this magnitude?
The most important thing is to have them move away. But at an ER in the emergency department, they usually get breathing treatments depending on their symptoms, etc. Most patients would benefit and feel better after the breathing treatment.
Okay, better safe than sorry. So people with pre-existing upper respiratory issues, call your doctor if you are experiencing any symptoms. Dr. Johnny, we appreciate your time. Once again, a pulmonologist with UT Health. Thank you so much for your insight.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you so much, doctor. As we look at this video moments ago of the Life Flight chopper arriving at Memorial Hermann, we see two people leaving the chopper. We don't know if anyone was injured or not. Of course, we're staying on top of that, the Level 1 Trauma Center there.
Yeah, it's a live look of the helicopter on the pad. So we're going to get more details as to in relation to that arrival.
Yeah, the leak was stopped relatively quickly when you think about all of the other ones we've covered in the past, but very slow to get initial information to us. Based on what we're seeing, we don't even know if this is connected yet, Life Flight. We can only assume, but we don't have any information about injuries or conditions. But my goodness, Dr. Johnny with UT Health provided a wealth of information for people who are in the shelter-in-place areas right now. That includes Freeport, that includes Lake Jackson and Clute, and you really need to pay extra attention and take precaution if you have pre-existing upper respiratory issues.
All right, we got Jason Miles, who has headed to the scene. I think he's on the phone now. Jason, can you hear us? Okay, I'm sorry. We have the Brazoria County Sheriff on the phone. Sheriff, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
What's the situation out there?
So currently what we have now is, I'm sure that it's been recorded that there's been a chlorine release, an accidental chlorine release from the Olin plant down in Freeport. There were some shelters in place from the city of Lake Jackson and the city of Clute. Those have just recently been lifted.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Okay,
That is
great.
That's good news.
Yes, that's great news. They have been lifted.
That's for Lake Jackson and Clute, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, so Freeport still has a shelter in place?
Not to my knowledge.
So shelter in place is over for everyone in that area.
Yes, that's the information that I've received. That's correct.
Does that include the schools as well?
Brazoria ISD and the college, have those shelter in places been lifted too, Sheriff?
Yes, I believe all the shelters that were initially in place have now been lifted.
Sheriff, can you tell us what is conducted, what kind of protocol that you go through with other city officials and maybe folks at the plant as to how you test the air quality to know when to lift the shelter in place?
Yes, so that is something that is conducted by the refinery or Olin itself to make that call. We certainly defer those things to them. They're the professionals on that. Our job is obviously, top priority for the law enforcement is, public safety, and that is our key goal. we do work closely, and we have a close partnership with all the refineries in the area, including Olin and Dow.
Well, Sheriff, based off of when the leak was first reported and when it was contained, would you say this was a quick response compared to previous leaks? Can you share some insight on that?
Certainly, from the information that I've received, from the timeline that I have, is that yes, it was certainly a quick response. There was quick notifications by all parties involved, and as mentioned before, I feel like that we have a very close relationship, and we're part of our the actual sheriff's office is working very closely with Olin and their security team as well as their responders.
Sheriff Stallman, do you know anything about injuries? Any injuries?
So at this time, there's none reported. Obviously, this is going to be thoroughly investigated and thoroughly looked at. We are obviously encouraging anyone, if they have any kind of symptoms that may be from this. I will say that there is no reported off-site release or any off-site complaints at this time.
Okay.
From every information that I've been able to obtain.
Sheriff, can
so
you
there could be injuries on the facility. We just don't know.
It's not been released.
That's right. Nothing to my knowledge at this time, but that's still, certainly being assessed.
Okay.
And looked into.
Sheriff, can you tell us or speak to at all at this point about any possible environmental impacts?
No, I can't speak on that. As I said before, it looks like this whole release has been contained to just on-site, and what impact is there, I'm unaware of.
Just to be clear, now that the shelter in place have been cleared, if you will, people can put their AC units and all of that on. So that's good news for them, correct, Sheriff?
That's correct. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, so what's next for you in the Sheriff's Department as per this leak?
Well, again, is just to assess the situation, make sure that that everything is contained and everything is being thoroughly investigated, to the fullest, and to assist Olin and Dow operations as much as we possibly can.
Okay, Sheriff Stallman, thank you so much for providing that update for us. Very important update. All the shelter in places have been lifted and the air is safe to breathe. We appreciate your time.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Great news, though. The
Very
shelter in
good.
place.
Great
The
news.
Very
shelter in
good.
place is over for the people in Clute and Lake Jackson, and the sheriff says, as far as he's concerned, nobody has been injured, at least off-site. Knows of no injuries, and that is fabulous news.
That's fabulous news. But of course, Dr. Johnny mentioned if you feel symptoms later, right, like coughing, breathing hard, that's something you want to get checked right away.
Yeah, and if anybody is having any of those symptoms, now might be the time for them to get to the hospital.
Check that out.
But hopefully none of that has happened.
Yeah.
Yes, hopefully. Well, we do have a few crews heading to the scene. We have our Troy Kless heading to Lake Jackson and Jason Miles heading to the plant. Even though the shelter in place has been lifted, there's still information to get out there. How did the leak happen? What's going on there on site? So he's working to get some information, whatever he can, talk to officials there, if anyone will talk with us.
Yeah, and even talking to residents, right? Hearing from them about what they did in the meantime. What next? Are they feeling any symptoms? Are they okay? Lots of questions to find out there on the ground.
Yeah, as we take another live look at the medical center and Memorial Hermann Hospital and the chopper that has just landed, hopefully nobody was transported to the hospital from this accident in Freeport today. Okay, let's give you some more information on chlorine exposure. Since you might still have a lot of questions about that. Especially chlorine gas can cause a range of health effects depending on the concentration and duration of exposure. Symptoms can range from mild irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat to severe respiratory distress and lung damage. It can be bad for you.
Yes, so that's particularly the case for folks with pre-existing upper respiratory issues, like if you're a smoker or if you have emphysema. So please read those symptoms and definitely call your doctor or go to the ER if you're experiencing anything like that.
Yeah, we've got Jason Miles here who just got to the scene right now. We're going to pull him up. He's arriving to the scene. Jason Miles just arrived there. Jason, you're on the phone with us now. What can you tell us? What are you seeing? I know they mentioned the shelter in places have been lifted, but what does the actual scene look like? Are emergency responders still there?
Yeah, I think that's the most important note at this point, that the shelters in place have been lifted. lifted, keep in mind they were all precautionary out of an abundance of caution. That's what happens down here when you have so many refineries, so many chemical manufacturers, so many plants that pose potential hazards. We just got into Freeport, and we see the Olin complex. Dow Chemical is also here, has a huge presence, Air Liquide as well. And when you go along 332, say you're going to Surfside Beach, you pass all of these different industrial sites. So it's a little bit confusing pinpointing exactly where this happened. We are currently still looking for Olin Plant B, Olin being a major chemical manufacturer. They also manufacture ammunition, I do believe. But we stopped at, wouldn't you know it, a Buc-ee's that is very prominent there if you've ever been to Surfside Beach. And several employees from the Olin plant were there gathered in the parking lot, somewhat concerned, but not really. They say this is part of the business, these kinds of incidents. Thankfully, according to them, they had not heard of any injuries or any significant issues as a result of the chlorine release this morning. We did see a couple of emergency personnel there kind of posting up at the Buc-ee's as well. Again, according to the sheriff, you probably reported this already, the Brazoria County Sheriff telling us that shelters in place have been lifted in the areas of Freeport, Lake Jackson, and Clute, all of the adjacent municipalities to this chemical industrial facility that we're talking about here this morning.
Jason, we're looking at some photos right now that we understand you got. Can you speak more about what we're seeing right now?
Yeah, that was a gentleman who posted on various social media platforms photos, I guess, in the immediate aftermath of the leak. You can see that kind of yellowish haze, and I've covered similar leaks in the past where you have this kind of cloud that emanates from wherever a release is happening. Obviously a little concerning when you look at those photos. He says he worked inside the Olin facility where this happened and was concerned at first. You may be able to read some of his captioning on what was initially a Snapchat post, I believe, alerting folks to what's going on, and his photos have since kind of taken off on social media, many people sharing them in this area, as they have also gotten alerts on their phones because they're signed up with the local emergency management association or organization that sends out alerts in these types of situations.
Yeah.
But he's still at work, he says, still there at the facility, kind of staying put at the moment, he says, as he has been ordered to do along with other employees, I presume.
And it's a good sign that obviously it's deemed safe for him to stay there. So, Jason, you've covered a few of these leaks and no explosion today, but when you go into an area that's been a shelter in place, and even though the shelter in place has been lifted, it's a weird scene out there. Well, can you describe it?
Yeah, honestly, Ron, it seems like it's business as usual for most folks. Traffic's still moving, people going in and out of stores, and I hate to say that, people in communities like this where you have this heavy chemical industrial complex type of atmosphere, we see it also in like Pasadena, Deer Park, those areas. It's just kind of part of life. Obviously, they take it seriously, and I hope people have, heeded precautions and advice from authorities. Certainly the school districts have. They shut down schools and that kind of thing, went into their normal shelter-in-place procedures. But for the most part, having been to Freeport on days when things like this are not happening, it doesn't seem a bit out of the ordinary from what I'm seeing. But again, keep in mind the shelter-in-place has been lifted.
So, Jason, what's the next thing you're trying to find out? I would imagine what caused this, right? And, of course, the level 3 leak, what that all means.
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. Hopefully authorities will clue us in on exactly what happened out here and how they managed to, stop the release pretty quickly, according to the post I saw on the emergency account of the agency that kind of oversees this kind of thing down here. But obviously the company itself will be looking at this, as they always do, after incidents to see what best practices were in place and if anything needs to be improved.
Jason, so just confirming here, based on what you're seeing, there doesn't appear to be any sort of panic or any running or any extra emergency vehicles at the plant, correct?
No, and honestly, I haven't gotten my eyes exactly on the location of where this happened, but no, we have not seen any frantic activity so far.
Okay,
but again, since the shelter in place has been lifted, maybe that's dissipated at this point.
Well, that's a good sign. We'll take it as a good sign, of course. Jason, have you been made aware of any news conferences that the company or any of the officials out there plan to have?
I have not, and I reached out independently to the company itself, which is based in Missouri, I believe, Olin Corporation, and I have not heard back yet. But I assume we'll get some kind of statement or some response to what happened here at some point today.
How far are you from the actual plant where this leak happened, Jason?
I'm not sure. If you're familiar with this area, there are tons of plants. And from what employees told me, it's kind of back beyond another plant we were looking at, which was a Dow facility. So even access to that actual location where this happened may be difficult for us, and certainly after an event like this, maybe even more difficult. But we're circling the area right on 332 right now, where 288 and 332 come together. If you're familiar with this area, like you're heading again to Surfside Beach.
All right, Jason Miles on the scene for us. Thank you so much for that report. We'll check back in with you, and I know you'll have a full report about what happened and how it ended coming up on our later newscast. We appreciate your time.
Yeah. So if you're just tuning in, here's what happened at this morning around 9:01. We got a report that there was a chlorine leak at the Olin plant in Freeport, and then around 9:30 we got the word of a shelter in place in Freeport, Lake Jackson, and Clute. And then around 9:46, we got a report that the leak had been stopped, but that the shelter in place remained in effect. And we just got off the phone a few minutes ago with the sheriff there, Bo Stallman in Brazoria County, who said that the shelter in place has been lifted for everybody involved. And as far as he knows, no one was injured, which is fabulous news.
It's really good news. And yeah, and just wanted to recap, Dr. Johnny, pulmonologist who we spoke to earlier, he did mention a couple of tips if you've been possibly exposed, right? And so some other ones that we got from him, he mentioned to wash your hair, face and hands, and then also wash the rest of your body. Use lots of lukewarm water and mild soap for several minutes. Also, he says finish with your plain water rinse. Try not to let the water run into your eyes, nose, or mouth. Do not scrub. And if your eyes are burning or you can't see normally, wash your eyes for 10 to 15 minutes in lukewarm water. And also do not use eye drops. So that's just a reminder there for folks who possibly could be exposed. But if you are breathing hard, if you are coughing hard, get to the hospital right away to get checked out. This is the time to do it, especially since the shelter in places have been lifted.
Yeah, it's very important to recap that because folks who already have pre-existing conditions and are dealing with upper respiratory issues, emphysema, if you're an active smoker, you could be experiencing these sort of symptoms much more quickly than other people. And as Dr. Johnny was telling us earlier, I asked if there was a healthy person within that shelter in place parameter, how long would it take them before they start experiencing symptoms? And he said it's hard to say because it depends on your proximity to the area where the leak occurred. So you just have to judge yourself and go to the ER, especially if you're a person with who's most at risk for something like that.
Another live picture from the Texas Medical Center of Lifelight leaving Memorial Hermann Hospital. We don't know where it's going, but of course we're keeping close tabs on everything. It arrived 10 minutes ago from the plant in Freeport, but we don't know if it brought anybody who was injured. And as far as the sheriff is concerned, nobody has been injured, at least off-site. So again, the sheriff saying that the shelter in place has been lifted, and we've got more confirmation. If you want more confirmation coming from CARE, which is the acronym for Community Awareness and Emergency Response, they're telling us that the chemical release in the Olin's Plant B has been stopped. The precautionary community shelter in place is lifted in all areas. The safety of our employees, the community, and our environment is always our top priority. So another confirmation that the shelter in place has been lifted.
And you mentioned you talked to, of course, the sheriff spoke on our program earlier, but he also mentioned that they did conduct tests, Olin refinery tests for the air quality, which is also how they were able to lift the shelter in place to give the all clear, essentially. We are still working to hear from the Olin refinery site there to get more information about if any employees have been injured on site. Hopefully that's not the case, but that's something else we're working to learn more about.
And when we spoke with Jason Miles, he said he doesn't see any sort of panic, any extra emergency crews who have arrived at the plant as far as where he's located. So that could possibly be some good news. And the sheriff also said, as you just mentioned, Ugochi, they do on-plant testing to speak with officials about when to lift a shelter in place, but oftentimes we find out later in the day that the American Chemistry Council, they will come back and they will do additional testing and just see what happened, how much of a certain chemical or gas was actually released in the air and how much it takes to issue a shelter in place. But Jason Miles also used the word precautionary, which is very good news when we're talking about shelter in place. So it sounds like that's why they issued this one in the first place.
That obviously a huge investigation has to be conducted now, and the plant has to do whatever it can to make sure this doesn't happen again, get to the cause of the leak that we still don't know anything about. Of course, we're hoping that the company will give us some kind of a spokesperson today that we can interview. They often have a news conference after the dust settles, so to speak, to speak to the media about what happened and what they intend to do about it. And of course, we'll be staying in touch with law enforcement down there as well.
Yeah, and of course, our reporters speaking to residents out there and really figuring out how they feel. Symptoms potentially could come up later, which is something we'll be watching as well.
Yes, because if people develop symptoms, that's a great point, Ugochi, because you want to hold somebody accountable. Hopefully we're not dealing with that. And I never want to say just a leak, because we've dealt with our fair share of chemical explosions here in the Houston area, but we never want to say just a leak, because that is a very harmful chemical, chlorine, to be released, and it can be very irritating for folks.
Yes, in any form. If you've got a pool, and so many people we know have pools, and the dangers of working with chlorine, just keeping your pool clean.
Oh yeah.
I've heard of people dying that way.
It's very sad. It's true though.
No, I think it's important to keep in mind to Sheriff Stallman. He did say that they were able to contain this leak, from his experience, pretty quickly, about 45 minutes. So for him, he was saying that's a quick time, a quick response to contain it, but still, that doesn't mean that people weren't exposed in that short amount of time. So that's something they have to watch out for. Again, no symptoms, right? If you're breathing hard, coughing, eyes start to burn, different things of that nature, definitely want to get that checked. Now that the shelter in places have all been lifted, now is the time to do it. If you feel anything wrong, don't wait.
45 minutes, a short period, relatively speaking, but it can be 45 minutes too long.
Exactly.
Depending on the person.
Yes. Well, we have our Troy Kless, who is on scene in Lake Jackson. He'll be speaking with residents and seeing if anyone smelled anything, what the scene was like there. And our Jason Miles, who we just spoke with a few minutes ago, is in Freeport near the plant. So he will also have a report coming up in our later newscast throughout the day.
Speaking of Jason, he did say it would be difficult to get to the part of the plant where the leak actually happened. Speaking to residents and people who work there, they say it's kind of hard. So I guess he's going to have to get as close as he can to get information from the
road
plant.
might be blocked off as well.
That too. Yeah.
But of course, we'll be searching for answers throughout the afternoon. If you're just tuning in, the chemical leak has been stopped, and the shelter in place in the Freeport area affecting Freeport, Clute, and Lake Jackson has been lifted. As far as we know, no injuries, but it's still early in the day.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us here for special coverage. For myself, Stephanie Simmons, Ron Trevino, and Ugochi Iloka, we appreciate you watching, and we will have the latest information about this leak on KHOU 11 Plus, also coming up on KHOU 11 News at noon.